Hey guys, so let me do a quick recap as I always do. So what we did so far is created a API framework where we have automated around 19 test cases. They all deals with different kind of API requests. So we have delete requests, get requests, batch requests, post requests, and put, as well as some options. So there are different feature files categorizing different various request types of this API. And I was also able to successfully execute them. So if I want to execute them now with run tests, so in run test, I've written all these tags. If you also notice, and on top of uh, each of these feature files, I have tagged them. So I think this tag is not correct. So maybe I'll make it correct. So this is patch. So that is the way basically by which I can make changes to, or basically I can tag a specific feature file so that I could actually choose what I wish to run, what I don't wish to run. So that is how I am able to put tags, and I can put inside Cucumber options these tags so that I can actually configure what needs to be executed. And these tests were actually I was able to run them. Maybe I can just show you, demonstrate. So I can click on JUnit test and they will start running. You see, so things are running. And if you can also notice, what's happening here right now is things are getting executed in sequence. There's something being filled inside patch. I have to see that. But the idea is, what I wanted to show you is things were running in sequence. That is, things were running in parallel. Now, sorry, in sequence. Now, there's another way of running this. Okay, let me show you that as well. So I was directly running it from right click and run as JUnit test. Another way of running this is via Maven. Now Maven also, you can do two things. Either you can run it from here using Eclipse. You can right click run as a Maven test, or you can also go to the folder structure, which I'll just demonstrate from where. I can just show you how can you run it from. Let me find out. So this is my folder. Inside this, what I can do is I can right click here and I can click on new terminal folder. In your case, if you are using Windows, you have to go to the folder, and the folder, by the way, the folder where you have a POM file maybe. So inside this, I have a POM file, right? So you need to go inside this folder in Windows, and the command line at the top address bar, you have to type CMD. And once you click enter, it will open. The command prompt will be opened with the in the exact folder, right? So you need to navigate to that folder where you have pom.xml file to run the Maven command. So in my case, in Mac, this is how it is. So if you notice, I'm inside this folder called as patch 8 Cucumber Selenium API. That means I'm inside this folder where I can see pom.xml, and here I can run this command called as Maven clean and test. So as soon as I do this, it will start executing my test cases. Now this is a second way of running my test cases. Maybe I'll just wait for some time for this to execute. So now it has started executing. It is printing things, doing something. Okay, and we'll wait for some time. Yeah, so run is complete. If you notice, there are saying test runs 23, failures 3. So few test cases failed perhaps. To watch where what went wrong, I can go inside target, because when you run it via Maven, things get saved inside target. So I'll go in the target folder, and then I can see HTML. This is my report area. If you notice, everything is passed except this patch, which we also found when something we can see what happened there. So I think some level of assertions is what is failed. Maybe we'll check, give it a look later. Something is not right with this, so maybe we'll have a look later, right? So this is basically how we can execute the pack which we have here. But the point which I was trying to explain for today is the way we have been passing or sharing the state. So if you notice, in the previous videos, if you watch those, then you would notice that I am using a test-based class where I have defined this request specification objects across my various step definition files, right? So if I had single step definition files, I really don't need to do all this, because in the single step definition files, all the methods which I have here would have access to response and request specification object, right? But this is not the case right now, because in my case, I am having different methods placed across various different step definition files, and various step definition files and their methods are actually accessing the same request specification object and the same response object. Why I need to do that? Because I am trying to reuse these variables. So secondly, why I'm doing this is, if you notice, I have a get request. In get request, I have few steps. Then I am having a, let's say, post request. Now post request have a method called as CoREST API is up and running. Now this method is defined inside get request dev, right? And this second step definition is present inside post request step definition, right? So the problem is, if I'm executing this step, which is actually responsible for initializing request specification object, then how would I pass this request specification object, which is actually defined inside this step def method, to a separate method which is placed in a separate step definition file, right? So the problem which I have is, in a nutshell, I need to pass the state of the object. The object which I have here called as request specification object, I'm kind of trying to use this in the second method, which is placed in a separate Java file, which is here, right? So I want to connect these two methods, right? So this is in Cucumber, or not in Cucumber, when typically it's called as sharing the state of the object, right? Now there are different ways of doing it. One way of doing this is using a test space. That is what I did, right? So I created a class called as test space. Inside that test space, I have created these variables so that it becomes accessible. And I have also marked them as static. So if this variable is being changed somewhere in some class method, it will also get reflected if I try to access this in a separate class method, right? So maybe if I go and show you by sharing a diagram, perhaps in the whiteboard, maybe if you can understand this way, right? So this is my, let me erase this right now. Let me draw another one. So if I now show you, so this, let's say these are my classes. Inside these classes, let's say I have these methods, right? This method 1, method 2, method 1, method 2, various methods, right? Now this is my, let's say, get step definition. This is my post request step definition. This is my put request step definition. But that doesn't mean that inside a put test case, I cannot use a method which is actually inside get request, a step definition file, right? So now let me draw another block. This is called as, I'll give it a name as test space. This is what I did, right? Inside this test space is what I have created: two objects, request specification and response. Now these are the two objects which I want, and I have marked them as static as well. That is what I was trying to show you before this diagram, right? So this is static request specification, this is static response, and once one method inside, one method, let's say this method is actually making changes to this, so this object is actually accessible, in all the other methods which wish to change or access these values, right? And that is how I have achieved sharing of state of the object. So these are two objects, request specification and response object, whose state is I'm trying to share across various steps, right? And as I always, I just said that if I didn't have these separate class files, then I didn't need to do all that, because in that case I would have created a class. On top of it, I would have written request specification. I would have created these as instance variables, and it would have access to all the methods could easily access them. But the problem is different. The problem is I need to share the request specification object and response object to various methods of which are kept inside different classes, right? Now, one of the way by which I could achieve this using static variables, right? Now, if I made something static, as you know in Java, if I'm making something as static, its value is retained and it is actually being saved and can be accessible from anywhere inside the project. All Java files can actually access that directly, right? And if I make any changes in a specific in any method, it actually is saved somewhere so that its state is still preserved, and any other method can actually access the same value which was previously changed by a different method, right? Now, the problem with this approach is that if you try to run this framework in a parallel environment, for example, if I try to run different test case, different feature files parallelly, then we would have a problem. Why? Because right now, if let's say this method is changing this value, if it is running in a sequence, then that different method which is going to be executed next will then access it, and then the different variable with different method which is going to change the value again will run after that. So things will run in sequence, and then we will have no problem, right? The problem appears when you're running it in a concurrent environment. So in a concurrent environment, there is a high possibility that two methods which are placed at different places can try to access it, or the same method which is being called by a different feature file can try to access or try to modify the values. Now, if this method is executed in parallel, let's say four concurrent instances of the same method is executing, they all will try to modify the values of this. Both will try to modify the value of this object, right? And if that happens, it could lead to problems, because it could give you weird responses, right? So in a nutshell, the parallel execution, if you're doing it a parallel execution, you should not be able to use static variables. Otherwise, it will give you bad results, uneven results. Sometimes something will pass, otherwise it will fail. A lot of bad things happen, right? So now if you want to use concurrent execution, if you want to do a concurrent execution or parallel execution, you want to build parallel execution environment, this is not the right approach to do that, right? So to achieve create something which would work very well in a parallel execution environment as well is a concept which is present inside Cucumber, and it's called as dependency injection. And it's not really Cucumber feature, it's actually a well-defined Java inversion of control IOC mechanism. And it has the fundamental of that dependency injection is that it gives you a way of injecting an object at runtime, right? So what do I mean by injecting? Maybe I'll just draw a small diagram and perhaps I'll show you the code. So idea of dependency injection, or where we would like to use dependency injection concept here to pass state, the idea would still actually will remain the same, but how it works is, so I will try to draw a few more diagrams. Okay, so maybe these are your test step definition files. So get step definition files, post step definition files, and now I will have another class. I will name that class as perhaps test context. Okay, I'll give it a name as test context, and this test context class is what I would pass across all the step def files, right? So you can understand this test context is kind of a string, and you have these step defs, which is this string is passing across all of these pearls. This just a form of analogy is what I'm trying to give. So understand these as a pearls, and this is a string. So right, so these pearls are actually using this string, and this string is actually a common class which all these pearls or classes is actually using. So the idea is, if you have something in this particular test context class, let's say in this case, let's say this is your response object, request specification object, and response object. If you something is there inside this test context, all of these classes, class 1, class 2, class 3, all will have access to the same object, right? So this is how, you know, in a DI, dependency injection environment, this is how we pass state, right? So again, request specification object, response object is being used and can be, you know, validated, can be get, can be set inside these step definition files, and can be sent and can be accessed inside different step definition file, right? Now I will show you its implementation. Give me a minute. I will share a new window. I will share my desktop, right? So in this case, this is simple test space, right? Here these are marked as static variable. Now we need to see its how we can achieve its dependency injection for passing the state. So first and foremost, to do that, we need to add a specific pom.xml, a specific dependency inside pom.xml file. It's called as Pico container. Those Pico container is something which is an open source library, and that actually provides a way of achieving dependency injection. Now Cucumber has identified that, and it has created its own library or dependency, which is called as Cucumber Pico container project or library. And this actually is what I am right now using to achieve dependency injection in my project. So how will I achieve it? The first and foremost, in any step definition files, first of all, I need to create a text context file. So in this case, I will create a test context file. I will name it as test context. Inside this test context, what I will do is I will create these objects there. So give me a text context. I will create the object, and I will of course remove the static part from this class. So these will no longer be a static classes. So I will define these here, and then what I'll do, I will try to inject this. And how will I inject it? I will create a constructor. So public get request set defs, and then inside this I will create, or I will parameterize it, test context. And inside this I'll write this dot, or maybe at the top I will create another object of this test context. Inside this test context, I will assign this instance variable of this class with the object which I am passing here, right? So the idea how this Cucumber picometer operates is, when you run this project, when you run a specific scenario, what will happen at runtime, test context object will be created and it will be injected in the class, right? So it will be injected in this class, and it will get saved inside this test context. So this is how we will implement dependency injection in our project. So I'll try to summarize it again. So first of all, you need to add this inside your pom.xml file. You need to add this dependency called as Cucumber Pico container. Once you do that, then you have to go your step definition file where you want to use this step definition, this test context class. You will create the constructor of it, and you will parameterize it with the test context. So what Cucumber will do, it will at runtime create the object of test context, and it will inject it at runtime. And the same object which the Cucumber injected is what you will capture here, and then you can actually use it. So inside this test context, so maybe for now I can just mark it as public so that it becomes accessible there. Otherwise, I should be creating a getter and setters for this. But just to explain this, I will just make all these as public, right? And inside this get request, what I will do, since that class has become accessible here, I will actually, instead of this request specification, I will do this, right? So now this request specification which is coming is not coming from test base, it is coming from an object called as test context. And this test context is not only is being injected in this class, I will inject this in all the step definition files. So something which is being used across all the projects, right? I would have to inject it in all these classes. So I will add it here, right? Now inside this patch also, inside this get, I will do the same inside this patch. So wherever you wish to share the objects which are present inside your the test context, if you want to share this request specification, this response, instead of using this test base, now you're going to use the dependency injection concept, right? So if I want to access anywhere the request specification, I'm going to call this request specification which is present inside test context, right? So the fundamentals of this is that test context class will be initialized at runtime by Cucumber, and it will inject the same class in all of these step definitions. And how I am injecting it, how Cucumber is injecting it inside the constructor of. So as soon as when Cucumber actually starts, it actually instantiates all of these step definition files. So while instantiating, it will see whether it has any constructor. If it has a constructor, it will see what is a parameter. Once it identifies what is a parameter, it will create that object. It will fetch this test context. It will create its object, and that object it will inject it here. And once it injects it here, I am actually capturing it. I'm capturing it here and saving that inside my test context object, instance test context object. Now this test context object is I am trying to reuse or use again all of these methods. Once the scenario is done, once scenario is completed, it will actually, for the next scenario, it will again inject it. So every time a new scenario is executed, every time there will be a new instance of it which will be injected and can be used. So that is why it will not hamper your parallel execution, because every time you run a scenario, it will, or even if two separate scenarios are being executed in parallel, that it will not have any problem, because for all of these scenarios, the test context object will be re-instantiated and re-injected for that scenario, right? And inside this test context object, we would have these request specification response object, which I would reuse or use across all of this my project. So it's something similar to what I was trying to explain earlier using the whiteboard. That is this test context. So this thing will happen for each scenario, right? For each scenario, there will be separate test context object. It will be injected in all of these step definition files and can be used across all of these methods present inside these step definition files. And the same request specification response object will be used across all of these methods. And that is how we achieve dependency injection in our Cucumber framework. Right, so now maybe I will show you the exact implementation of it. So I actually did that exact implementation, and I actually did it inside separate, separate branch. Maybe I will do one thing. Let me replace with head division. So I'm just resetting these changes, and then I will navigate to. Let me delete this file as well. I don't need it. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll go to team, I'll go to switch to, and I will select API DI implementation branch. And in this branch is what I have actually implemented it. So if you save, so if I show you my get request, so this is my test context, right? This is the test context. I have these 4 variables which I want to share across all these step definition files. Then I have a hooks class. Inside this hooks class, I have added before and after. If you notice that in all my previous classes, I had before and after available in all these class files, which is kind of duplicacy. So I have removed that from there and put my before and after class here, right? And in this hooks also, I am injecting this test context. So same test context object is what I'm injecting all my classes. I'm injecting it here, I'm injecting it put request, I'm injecting it delete, I'm injecting it get request definition. If you see, I'm injecting the same class everywhere. And you can perceive it or understand it as this test context, the same object, the same test context object is available in all of these step definition files, right? Because at runtime this is being injected. When I injected, the same object is injected across all these step definition files. So I'm stressing this point again and again. Don't think that this object is in some way different than this object. Even though I have defined this separately in separate classes, it gives you a feeling that these are separate objects, but they are actually the pointing to the same object, right? The same object which is defined here. So, sorry, the values inside this object are these, and the same request specification response objects is being accessible across all these step defs. All right, and really I don't have to extend this now, right? So if you notice, inside this test space I have removed this, so we don't have it here. I'm extending this still because I still want to share few of these things, server access token. Now these are static things, so it doesn't change at runtime, so I can still use it, as well as few methods is what we have here. So that is the reason I'm still using test space, but I'm clearly not using it for my request specification response and all these things. I've commented that, and these are being present here, and this class is being injected at runtime in all of these step definition files, right? So if I just show you, if I just run it now, so if I go here and do a run test, run test, so they will execute. So if you notice the time which it would take to execute, so it's actually taking at least 10 to 15 seconds to execute all of that. Now, if I want to run this in parallel, that also I will demonstrate. So if I into form.xml file, I've added a plugin called as Maven Surefire. Now this Maven Surefire is a plugin which is responsible for execution of your test, okay? But it also can execute Cucumber test cases, Cucumber scenarios in parallel, okay? So if you notice, I have written here parallel for this, how to run things, how can we use Surefire to run things in parallel. For that, I have already recorded a video as well as a project. So this is parallel execution Cucumber. I recorded a video which is again uploaded. You can watch that, how to do, to run Cucumber feature files in parallel. So I'm using the same mechanism here. So configuration, I have written parallel as method, thread count as 4. That means 4 feature files will execute simultaneously, and a few more stuff per core, thread count and all, which is actually explained inside this project in that video. So I'm not going to come to that right now. So in order to run Cucumber test in parallel, I cannot directly run it from here. So I have to run this via Maven, right? So what I'll do is I'll go here, run as, not run as here. So I have to go to the project level, right click, run as. First of all, I'll do a Maven clean, and then I will do a Maven run as, come on. Then I'll do a run as Maven test. So this time what will happen? It will start executing things in parallel. Okay, so my execution is actually done as well, right? So you see previously it took me 15 seconds to run. Now it got executed in less than, I think I didn't count it, but I think 3-4 seconds it was done. So that is the advantage of parallel execution. And in any test framework, parallel execution mechanism has to be there, because the moment when you have hardly 50, 100 test cases, it doesn't matter, right? But when it becomes huge, when you have Selenium tests, when you have API tests, and they are of the amount of around, let's say 2,000, 3,000 test cases, then you cannot afford a sequential execution. You need a parallel execution. So while designing a framework, it's very important that you don't add something there which will have a problem later when it comes to the parallel execution. And using static variables is one of the biggest problems in any framework. If you're making something static, it's a recipe of disaster later, right? And that is why this dependency injection I have used, even though I have 19 test cases, still I have implemented this dependency injection concept, because it will not create a problem later on when I use parallel execution, or when I use things in parallel, when I want to execute my test case in parallel, right? So I will push this, I add this or merge this API DI impl in my master branch, and we are going to work on this implementation of API, and maybe after that I will not be working on this API. So inside this framework is we are going to use for our Cucumber plus Selenium test cases as well. Yeah, thank you.